Well done, Pele. You're doing much better, Krivax said kindly. The Tuskar seamstress was quickly improving in her ability to properly weave Nerubian silk. Krivax had already stayed in Kamagwa for over a week now, and he was really enjoying himself. He had been ceaselessly working toward his goal for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to slow down. There were so many things he wanted to do in this fantastical world, but circumstances forced him to push all of those things aside. Krivax wanted to see every inch of this world and experience all that it had to offer. He wanted to make friends, learn about new cultures, discover forgotten magic, and taste every kind of shellfish in the world. He still was not yet secure enough to allow himself to relax completely, but staying in a peaceful village like Kamagwa made him want to dream again instead of only plotting ways to stay alive. Krivax reluctantly pushed those thoughts aside. While he had his own wants and ambitions buried deep within his heart, they would have to wait. He came to this village for a reason, after all. The negotiations with the chieftain had gone well, with Krivax agreeing to trade silk and ores for a variety of shellfish. He had suspected that shellfish would prove delicious to the Nerubian palate, but he had not anticipated it being as good as it was. Krivax and Masrouk may or may not have embarrassed themselves a little when they tried their first lobster. Suffice to say, Krivax was confident shellfish would prove a stable trading good between Killerhook and Kamagwa. He intended to look into other goods that the Tuskar could offer, such as surface world plants that could be used for alchemy, but trading silk for shellfish would suffice for now. Aside from trading for shellfish, the two parties had also reached a few other agreements. While they had not yet developed enough trust to begin sharing their magic with one another, the chieftain agreed that it was something they would be willing to consider. What Krivax was most happy about was the agreement for them to mutually share stories and knowledge. After all, that was how Krivax intended to find evidence of the existence of other continents. Thank you, Krivax. You are a good teacher, Pele said with a smile. While Krivax was not himself a weaver, like most Nerubians, he knew enough about the intricacies of working with Nerubian silk to teach the seamstress. Nerubian silk possessed many special properties, and training was needed if someone wanted to use it for crafting. Once she was done with her training, Pele would go on to teach the rest of the Tuskar seamstresses. Krivax spent the next few minutes finishing up his lesson with Pele before deciding to go find Masrouk. Just as he was about to make his way to the part of the village set aside for warriors to practice, he was interrupted by a soft whistling sound near his feet. When he looked down, Krivax saw a tiny Tuskar child who was wrapped up in a snug little fur coat whistling at him and lifting his arms. Huffing in amusement, Krivax bent down, lifted up the child, and placed him on his back. The people of Kamagwa had been cautious and fearful of the two Nerubians at first, but their friendly and peaceful nature quickly shone through. Kafu was a Tuskar child whose mother had passed away recently and whose father was frequently out to sea. The kid was extremely quiet and barely talked, but he did spend most of his time wandering around Kamagwa and watching the various villagers work with curiosity. Once the villagers had started to warm up to him, Kafu had taken to quietly riding on Krivax's back while he went about his business. Krivax couldn't help but indulge the kid. Tuskar children were unfairly adorable with their oversized heads and tiny little fur coats. Without comment, Kafu quietly settled into a comfortable position while Krivax made his way to find Masrouk. The first thing Krivax saw when he reached the training area was the predictable sight of Masrouk sparring with Kaganut. Turning to the side and laying down so that Kafu could get a better view of the spectacle, Krivax decided to wait until they were finished before going to speak to his friend. While the spar looked to be evenly matched, Krivax knew that was only because Kaganut was holding back significantly. While Masrouk was talented in combat, his mere 4 years of experience simply could not compete with the Tuskar warrior. Though to his credit, Kaganut was one of the most skilled warriors in Kamagwa and Masrouk had handily defeated some of their younger warriors. Krivax watched as the two warriors traded quick blows with incredible amounts of force. Masrouk was skilled with his spear and was good at moving quickly and attacking from unexpected angles, but Kaganut moved faster than any giant walrus person had a right to and seemed as stable as a mountain. Eventually, the fight ended with Masrouk defeated and Kaganut looking smug and none the worse for wear. Kafu started to clap his hands in excitement and let out little whistling noises. Krivax knew his friend would try to get back to fighting almost immediately, so he decided to call out to him first before he could. Masrouk. Krivax stood back up carefully so as to not throw off Kafu as his friend made his way over to him. "Krivax, do you need help with something?" asked Masruk. "Not really, buddy," said Krivax. "I just wanted to remind you about our meeting later today." Krivax knew that his friend could be a little absent-minded when his attention was focused on combat. It was a good idea to occasionally remind him about important matters. What meeting? Krivax sighed in exasperation and Kafu patted his back in what seemed to be comfort. The boy was quiet but had a talent for understanding what others were feeling. "Our meeting with Vizier Hadix. I need to scry him later today after I'm done speaking with Elder Wamnai." "Ah, yes. I will be there," said Masruk. Krivax felt amused as his friend turned back to look at the warriors as soon as he was done speaking. "All right, thanks. Have fun practicing." Nodding in acknowledgement, Masruk turned around and started to head back to the Tuskar warriors, most of whom seemed to enjoy his company. Krivax was glad to see his friend so easily getting along with the Tuskar. With his message delivered, Krivax started walking to Elder Wamnai's home with a sense of anticipation. The old shaman had agreed to answer questions about their culture and share some Tuskar legends, and Krivax was hopeful he might be able to use this opportunity to gain his first hints of the existence of other continents. Wamnai's home was located near the chieftains and was not particularly distinct from any of the other buildings in the village. The entrance did not have an actual door and was instead covered by a heavy sealskin, so Krivax settled on calling for the elder instead of knocking. "Elder Wamnai. I'm here for our meeting," Krivax yelled into the building. "Come inside, boy. Why are you standing outside my home and making all that noise?" "Well, all right then." Krivax skittered into the elder's home with Kafu still securely settled on his back. The inside of the building was much like the chieftain's, except for the various herbs and animal parts laying around that Krivax assumed were used for the old Tuskar's shamanism. Wamnai herself was seated on what looked to be a comfortable pile of seal hide pillows while carving symbols into what Krivax assumed was a piece of whalebone. "Feed the calf and sit down while I finish," said Wamnai, pointing to a pile of pillows and a nearby bowl filled with fish without looking at him. Seeing no reason to argue, Krivax picked up a fish and handed it to Kafu, who immediately started to nibble on it. After finding a comfortable position, Krivax lowered himself to the ground and curled his feet underneath his body. Once the shaman was done with whatever she was doing, Wamnai put away the bone and turned her attention to Krivax and Kafu. "You indulged that boy too much," said Wamnai after casting a translation spell with a wave of her hand. Krivax had made a lot of progress in learning the Tuskar language, but a week's work of effort was not enough for him to reach a level of mastery acceptable to Wamnai. "Kafu is very well behaved," said Krivax while patting the young Tuskar on the head. Kafu ignored him and continued to eat his fish. "He's not a bother, so I feel no reason to deny him if he just wants to ride on my back. He'll get fat and lazy if he doesn't use those stubby little legs of his," said Wamnai with a huff. Kafu directed a mulish glare in her direction, but the elder ignored him. "You're here earlier than I expected. Are you that excited to learn about our people, boy?" "Learning new things is always exciting to me, elder. Just call me Wamnai. I'm not interested in hearing you end every sentence with elder." "Of course, Wamnai," Krivax said easily. Nerubian society had forced him to grow accustomed to a certain degree of formality, but if the elder preferred to be addressed casually then he wouldn't complain. "If I'm remembering right, you said that you wanted to learn about our gods, correct?" asked Wamnai. "That's correct. I specifically wanted to know how your gods compared to the Drakkari's lower. The difference is our gods don't demand our worship. We give it freely," Wamnai said derisively. "Any spirit that requires you to worship them before they offer you anything are spirits that any shaman with sense would run away from. Teutka, Karkut, Islaruk, and Ochinoa do not need our worship nor do they interfere with mortal affairs, unlike the Drakkari's lower. We honor them because they guide and aid our people." From there, Wamnai went on to share more specific details about the Tuskar gods. Teutka was a female Tuskar shaman who became a powerful spirit after her death that continued to aid her people by guiding fishermen away from danger and to large catches. Karkut the Dark One was responsible for shepherding Tuskar spirits to the afterlife, Islaruk was the spirit of war and weather, and Ochinoa was the goddess of the depths and wisdom. Ochinoa was the only one Krivax knew for certain existed, given that she appeared in the game as a Kraken wild god. After she was done speaking, Krivax reciprocated by telling her some of the Nerubian legends about the old gods. More specifically, how legends said how the Nerubians had become enlightened and turned away from the worship of beings who at best were casually cruel and destructive even to their own worshippers, treating them no better than tools to be used and discarded. Nerubians did not worship anything anymore. They believed that gods could not be trusted to care for the well-being of mortals, and the old gods were considered to be mere stories at this point in time. Krivax had actually never met a single Nerubian who believed that the old gods existed at all, but he had suspicions that the Nerubian leadership might know the truth. Whenever he attempted to discreetly research the matter, he would find any information related to the old gods to be suspiciously vague. He probably would not have noticed if he did not already know the truth, but it was suspicious enough that Krivax had put aside all attempts to research the void or the old gods. He didn't have much to tell her, but by the time he was done, Wamnai seemed to be satisfied anyways, even if she found the legends themselves rightly disturbing. "What else did you want to talk about?" Wamnai asked when they were done talking about gods. "You have a look in your many eyes like you're about to chomp down on a lobster." Krivax did his best to rein in his anticipation. "I wanted to hear your people's legends on the Sundering," said Krivax. "My people have many theories about what caused it, but those theories are mostly speculation." The Nerubians really had no idea what caused the Great Sundering. Many of their theories came close, in that they believed that the elves were most likely to blame, but from their perspective, one day the land simply exploded and they had no idea why. Krivax had been unable to verify whether the Nerubians had even been aware of the Burning Legion's first invasion. "The Sundering? Sorry boy, but we don't know what happened either," Wamnai said with a frown. "According to Ochinoa, there was some kind of war going on at the time, but she's not willing to talk about it." "That's a shame," Krivax said casually. "My people would like to know what destroyed the rest of the continent. The old world was a land of many wonders, according to legend. It's a shame that these lands are all that is left of it." "What are you talking about?" Wamnai said incredulously. "This land is not all that is left of the old world. There is still plenty of land across the sea." "Bingo." "What?" Krivax exclaimed in fake astonishment. "How could you possibly know that?" "I've never been there myself, but I've been told that people from lands beyond the sea sometimes trade with the Moki clan," Wamnai said with a frown. "I'm surprised that people as supposedly advanced as yours do not know about the other lands. My people tend to keep to themselves, and have been isolated underground for thousands of years for the most part. If what you say is true, then I'm not surprised we do not know of it," Krivax explained to Wamnai. "Still, I'm certain our people would be glad to know about this. And what will your people do with this information?" Wamnai asked with open suspicion. "Nothing bad," Krivax said hurriedly. "But I do think they might be interested in sending people to the other lands to learn more about them." Wamnai glared at him with suspicion while Krivax did his best to look like an innocent spider person and Kafu did his best to open the shell of a crab with his tiny teeth. Eventually, the elder shaman just huffed, "Bah. Far be it from me to tell you how your people should act with those far from these lands, but if you embarrass yourself, don't go getting our names involved." "I wouldn't dream of it," Krivax said with mock sincerity. Krivax and Wamnai spent the rest of the meeting talking about the lands beyond the sea, sharing various legends, and comparing different parts of their cultures. For example, both of their species highly valued communal cooperation, but differed in how they treated interpersonal relationships, with Tuskar strongly believing in strong family units while Nerubian families as a concept just didn't exist. Wamnai thought that kind of life must be incredibly lonely, while Krivax explained they still had relationships and friendships, but they weren't as expressive as Tuskar ones. Krivax also tried to figure out if Wamnai knew anything about any wars taking place on the lands across the sea, or if she knew anything about the Dark Portal, but Wamnai seemed to care little about things happening so far away. By the time they were ready to finish, Kafu was barely able to stay awake. "Leave the calf here," said Wamnai as Krivax got up to leave. Krivax nodded in agreement and gently placed Kafu down on the pile of pillows before turning to leave. Just as he was about to walk out of Wamnai's home, a soft voice stopped him. "Bye." Krivax turned and gave a short wave to the tiny Tuskar. "Goodbye, Kafu. Sleep well." After Krivax left the house and stepped outside, he was startled to realize that the sun was already starting to go down. I must have spent much longer talking to Wumnai than I thought. He didn't have much time before he needed to speak with Hadix, so Krivax hurriedly collected his friend and dragged him off to the building that the Tuskar used to house guests. Once they were both in their shared room, Krivax retrieved the scrying crystal from his spatial bag, mounted it on a small platform, and quickly started casting the necessary spells. After a few minutes, violet glyphs began to appear before the crystal and the visage of Vizier Hadix appeared on its surface. Initiate Krivax, I was starting to believe you had completely forgotten about me, that or died, Hadix said with mild irritation. I apologize for being late, Vizier, said Krivax, lowering his head in contrition. I was speaking with the Tuskar's eldest shaman and found myself losing track of time. Humph. Do not allow it to happen again, Hadix said sternly. Now, report to me everything that has happened since you left for the surface. Yes, Vizier. Krivax spent the next half hour detailing their first contact with the Tuskar, their subsequent meeting with the chieftain, and the agreement to trade silk for shellfish. Masrook remained mostly quiet, although he did share his own perspective at times. Once he was done, Hadix paused for a moment in consideration before speaking. If these shellfish are as delicious as you say and these people are willing to give them to us for something as worthless as a few common ores and some low-level silk, then I suppose this deal will be to our benefit, said Hadix offhandedly. There are some who would enjoy more options for luxury food. Krivax knew that Hadix probably considered such luxuries to be frivolous, so he wasn't surprised by the faint dismissiveness he heard in the vizier's tone. If he wanted to impress the man, he would need to present something more materially beneficial. Is that all, Initiate? Asked Hadix with disinterest. If so, then I have experiments that require my attention. Here we go, Krivax thought nervously. No, Vizier. I have something else to report, Krivax said hesitantly. Krivax reported to Hadix what Wumnai had said about the existence of other continents. While the topic seemed to catch the vizier's immediate attention, he at first seemed to believe the shaman was merely sharing a Tuskar fairy tale. It was only after Krivax informed him that the Tuskar had personally met with people from other continents that the vizier began to show extreme interest. Once Krivax was done telling the vizier everything he knew, Hadix remained silent for nearly a minute while he absorbed the information. One moment, Initiate, said Hadix, speaking suddenly into the silence. Krivax grew confused as the image of Hadix disappeared and the scrying crystal grew dark. Did he just hang up on me? Suddenly, both Krivax and Masrook leapt back in surprise as a bright violet light materialized in the center of their room. Their surprise only increased when the light faded to reveal that Vizier Hadix had decided to teleport into their temporary home. Hello, Initiate, said Hadix, focusing completely on Krivax and ignoring Masrook. We need to talk. Krivax was rendered speechless as he stared dumbly at the vizier. He had expected that Hadix would show an interest in news of people from a different continent, but he had not expected the vizier to brazenly teleport into his temporary home. He had not been prepared for such an intense reaction from the normally aloof Hadix. Krivax glanced worriedly at the doorway, half expecting Elder Wumnai to come running in and start berating the vizier for entering the village uninvited. Understanding his concern, Masrook quickly moved closer to the entrance and positioned himself so that nobody could come in without pushing him aside. Cease your worrying, Hadix said dismissively, one arm waving through the air and trailing arcane energy. I have already placed privacy wards that will ensure we remain undisturbed. Now, repeat everything you have told me. Seeing no other option, Krivax once again told the vizier everything that Wumnai had heard about the foreigners from lands across the sea. While he did, the vizier stared at him with an intense focus that made Krivax feel distinctly uncomfortable. For as long as he has known the vizier, he has always given off a feeling of disinterest in nearly everything not related to his own studies, so his current focus seemed distinctly out of character. When Krivax was done talking, the vizier continued to stare at him silently for a few moments before speaking. From now on, finding evidence to support or disprove these claims is your highest priority, said Hadix, more serious than Krivax had ever seen him. This is more important than your shellfish or the Tuskar's shamanism or your desire to make friends with the surface races. If you fail to find this evidence, then I will find it myself, and I doubt the Tuskar will be as welcoming anymore when I am done. Do you understand? Yes, Vizier Haedix. I understand, said Krivax. It was fortunate that this was already his highest priority, because he could tell that the Vizier would not accept any other answer. Good, said Haedix. After Krivax signaled his acquiescence, the Vizier relaxed significantly. He even decided to walk over to one of the baskets of shellfish sitting in the corner of the house and pick it up with a look of faint curiosity. Go ahead and ask your questions, initiate. Krivax calmed down as the Vizier seemed to relax. If Haedix was inviting him to ask, then he didn't see a need to hold back. Yes, Vizier. Why did you decide to come here personally? Krivax asked hesitantly. Why not simply tell me this through the scrying crystal? Humph. I suppose my reaction must seem disproportionate to you, said Haedix as he picked up one of the shrimp and examined it. You are young, and there are many things about this world you do not yet know, and I cannot yet tell you. The Vizier bit into shrimp and his expression turned into one of pleasant surprise before quickly fading back into its usual stoicism. I decided to come here for 3 reasons, Haedix continued. First, I wanted to be here in person as Yuri told me the shaman's words. Second, I wanted to impress upon you the seriousness of the situation. Krivax watched as the Vizier cracked open a lobster with one of his hands and started to pick apart its insides. And the third? Krivax asked cautiously. I wanted to bring you this, said Haedix. The Vizier idly pulled out a small black and gold figurine that was shaped like a spider from a small spatial bag tied to his robe with one of his back arms. Krivax could easily feel the magic it radiated. This tool will allow you to telepathically control a few of the non-sapient skitters or flyers, while also allowing you to control larger groups of more common insects and arachnids if the need arises. Krivax looked at the enchanted figurine in disbelief. He knew Nerubians had a natural ability to control and dominate non-sapient spiders, bugs, and the like, but unless you were a spider lord, that was usually on the small scale. He had heard of these things before, but he had never seen one in person. As far as he knew, only the higher castes would possess these magical artifacts, so Krivax was immediately suspicious of Haedix's motivations for giving him one. Still, it wasn't as if he could say no, so Krivax hesitantly took the figurine and stored it in his own spatial bag. There would be time to examine it later when there wasn't a Vizier standing right in front of him. Thank you, Vizier, Krivax said while bowing low in an expression of gratitude. But if I may ask, why have you chosen to give this to me? That's simple. Because your time has significantly grown in value and your safety has become more important to me, Haedix said matter-of-factly. The skitters and flyers will not only offer you additional protection, but they can also be used to transfer trading goods between Killerhook and this village. I want you to gather evidence, not waste time acting as a courier. That made sense to Krivax, even if he was still suspicious of the Vizier's intense interest. I understand, said Krivax. While Haedix was here, and since he was already eating it, he might as well get the Vizier's opinion on the shellfish. On the topic of the shellfish, do you believe they will be popular as a long-term trading good, Vizier? Haedix paused as he was lifting a crawfish to his mandibles. They are adequate, initiate. I believe these shellfish will be popular amongst the city's leadership. I suspect the funding our division will receive will increase significantly as a result. Well done. Given how much it looks like you're enjoying them, I think they're a little more than adequate. If there is nothing else, then I will make my departure, said Haedix. I will arrange for the skitters and flyers to be sent to your location. Inform the Tuskar before they arrive. It would be a waste if they were needlessly killed. Without waiting for a response, the Vizier disappeared in a flash of violet light. Once the light faded and the room became quiet, Krivax only had to spend a few moments thinking about their conversation before he reached an obvious conclusion. Vizier Haedix was hiding something. Krivax had known the Vizier for over a year, and in all that time he had never seen Haedix show this level of interest in anything. He often wondered why the mage was assigned to the Surface World Research Division when he never revealed any actual interest in the surface. The more he thought about it, the more Krivax realized how little he knew about the Vizier who had supported him since he joined the circle. Krivax, is the Vizier always like that? Asked Masruk as he returned from guarding the entrance. No, he's not usually that intense, said Krivax. Then you should be careful. Until you understand his motivations you should be wary of him, Masruk said with concern in his voice. I'll be careful, said Krivax. But I think we should be fine. It's not like he asked me to do anything that I wasn't already planning on doing anyway. I will ask the warriors what they know about the lands beyond the sea when I speak to them tomorrow. Thanks, Masruk, said Krivax with genuine gratitude. I appreciate your help, buddy. It's not a problem, said Masruk. He paused before continuing to speak with slight hesitation. The surface is much more interesting than I had expected. If these unknown lands exist, then I believe I would enjoy seeing them for myself. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself, Krivax said fondly. Masruk had really begun to flourish during their stay in Kanagwa. Not only had his skills as a warrior improved by being exposed to new fighting styles, but he had also become slightly less reserved amongst the friendly Tuskar and shown an increased curiosity in the world. The two Nerubians spent a few more minutes discussing their plans for the coming day, before deciding it was time to go to sleep. They both knew that tomorrow was likely to be an eventful day for Krivax. It was still funny to see how confused Masruk got about the day-night cycle of the world, and how most creatures slept after the sun went down. Tomorrow he would need to have another conversation with Wamna and the chieftain so he could attempt to negotiate for him to be introduced to the Moki clan. Krivax had intended to wait a little longer for him to earn some more trust, but Vizier Hadix had made it explicitly clear that waiting long without showing results was not an option. However, he was not too worried. Krivax did not believe Wamna would be particularly opposed to arranging a meeting as long as he did not cause any trouble for her people. Just as Krivax started to skitter over to his nest of pillows and webs after having decided that tomorrow's problem could wait until the morning, he realized something important. Vizier Hadix had stolen all of their shellfish. Hadix shrugged off the discomfort inherent to long-distance teleportation with practiced ease as he reappeared in his laboratory. Placing the basket full of delicious aquatic arthropods somewhere safe, Hadix moved quickly to clean up his alchemical experiments. He had believed that he would have enough time to finish brewing a few experimental elixirs after his meeting with the initiate, but he now had more important things to do. Unfortunately, these elixirs were not stable enough for him to leave them unattended for long, so all of the expensive reagents that had gone into them would be wasted. How unfortunate. Still, compared to even the slight possibility that the rest of the old world had not been completely destroyed in the Great Sundering, even the most expensive of elixirs were a trifling matter. Once Hadix ensured that his laboratory would not explode in a violent magical reaction while he was away, he started making his way to his personal chambers as quickly as he reasonably could without drawing unwanted attention. After all, a vizier sprinting down the cigarettes hallways would raise more than a few questions. Hadix paid no mind to the startled initiates who scrambled out of his way. They were unimportant. Once he was within the nondescript chamber in one of the cigarette's many rooms, Hadix shut the door behind him and cast his most powerful anti-scrying wards over the room. Some might consider his actions to be overly paranoid given the measures he had already taken to protect against spying, but Hadix felt it appropriate given the circumstances. After he finished casting the wards, Hadix cast a deceptively complicated spell that caused a portion of the wall near a random bookcase containing basic tomes and scrolls to fade away. The illusion itself was fully solid until it was removed, something that very few were capable of, so it was the perfect place to hide things one wanted away from prying eyes. Hadix ignored all of the valuable magical artifacts hidden in this secret alcove and retrieved an unassuming scrying crystal. After placing the crystal in the center of the room and casting the spell to activate it, Hadix settled down to wait. He knew that the vizier he was attempting to contact was frequently busy, so it would take some time before he could establish his own scrying orb in a secret location. Thankfully, it seemed that the vizier was able to move somewhere private quicker than Hadix expected because it was only 15 minutes after he cast the scrying spell that the visage of Sirixit appeared in the scrying crystal. Hadix? Why are you scrying me? Has something happened? Said Dixit with audible tension. Yes, something has happened, said Hadix, straight to the point. An initiate that I have been personally instructing has potentially discovered something that would be extremely important to the Order, and I intend to discover the truth of the matter as soon as possible. Your skills as a seer would aid me greatly in doing so. What is it, Hadix? Asked Dixit, his tension only increasing. Speak clearly. Very well. Haydux quickly told the seer everything that he knew about the possibility that other portions of the supercontinent of the old world had survived the sundering. Once he was done speaking, Haydux could see the concern he felt reflected in Ixit's expression as the seer agreed to use his magic in an attempt to divine the truth. Using magic in an attempt to see the future or discover secrets was, more often than not, extremely unreliable. Not only were there very few people with the necessary talent, but there were simply too many complications inherent to such magic. The future itself was uncertain, and trying to discern the more likely possibilities from the infinite timeways was a skill that required a lifetime to hone. It did not help that even if a seer could accurately divine the future, the information they received was not always useful or only expressed in a cryptic manner. Every seer in Azjol-Nerub had received the same visions of a future in which a tide of death swept over their kingdom, but what were they supposed to do with that information? Was that tide of death the result of a plague? Was it the result of a civil war? The reawakening of the Vrykul? Preparations had been made for a number of possibilities, but without knowing specifically what they were preparing for, there was very little that they could do. Fortunately, Haydux hopes that Ixit would be able to give him more useful information. Not only was Ixit the greatest seer of his generation, but the information he was looking for was the kind of information seers excelled at finding. If the claims made by the Tuskar shaman were true, then the future had likely changed significantly the moment Initiate Krivax had brought the matter to Haydux's attention. If Azjol-Nerub were to discover the existence of lands beyond the sea, then the future consequences of it should be large enough for Ixit to uncover. Especially since the seer knew exactly what to look for. Haydux waited patiently as Ixit attempted to divine knowledge from the indeterminate future. From an outside perspective, watching the seer quietly mutter to himself for several minutes was rather uneventful. When the seer finished his divination and turned his attention back to Haydux, his expression was solemn. "I foresee a period of great political upheaval and an era of change in our kingdom's future," said Ixit. Haydux and Ixit both remained silent for several moments as they allowed the implications of that to sink in. "How could we have possibly missed this?" asked Haydux in disbelief. "You know how insular and stagnant the leadership in the capital is," Ixit said wearily. "The village of Tuskar, who have supposedly met with people from across the seas in Dragon Blight. It's not surprising that this would escape their notice. I know better than anyone how useless those self-important fools are," Haydux said derisively. "I'm not asking how they missed this. I'm asking how we did." Ixit was silent for several moments before he responded. "The Order's observation of the surface races has only ever been conducted with the intent of searching for the Old One's influence. If we didn't find anything, then I suspect we simply moved on without looking any deeper." "Well, that was obviously a mistake," Haydux said bluntly. "There is still some chance it's not true," said Ixit, sounding as if even he did not believe his own words. "I doubt it." While seers were not always reliable, this was already enough to convince Haydux of the shaman's claims, even if he recognized it would not be enough to convince the kingdom's leadership. They would no doubt care little for the words of a primitive shaman from a lesser race, and they would likely also dismiss the findings of the seer. Azjol-Nerub took great pride in being the most advanced civilization in the world, but how could they continue to make such claims if they didn't even know what else existed in it? There would be many who would wish to dismiss the existence of lands across the sea and continue to believe that only their land was what was left after the Great Sundering. However, while Haydux did look down on the more primitive races, he was wise enough to recognize that primitive was not the same as stupid. The Tuskar possessed the most significant maritime tradition of the known surface races. The idea that someone could have fooled them into believing in such a lie was far-fetched. There was also simply no perceivable motivation for somebody to tell such a story if it was not true. Haydux and Ixit spent the next hour discussing what they should do with this information. Eventually, they both decided that it would be best for them to acquire stronger evidence before they could bring this to the Order or the kingdom's leadership. Ixit agreed to send a few flyers to surveil the Tuskar in Dragon Blight. Once they were done, Haydux returned the scrying crystal to his secret alcove and allowed himself to take a moment to come to terms with the implications of what he had learned. All of his instincts were telling him that the lands across the sea existed. If they did, then that meant the prisons of the other Old Ones likely still existed as well and were potentially accessible to any mortal who finds them. If that were to be the case, then that would change everything.